So the opening image captures the stark and frightening desolation of an imprisoned man. This imprisoned man is one of the many millions in the United States and all over the world who are routinely forgotten by the mainstream of music performance and education. And so I'd like to spend a few moments with you to just draw attention to those who we forget, sometimes deliberately exclude, the uncounted millions. What I'm terming the forgotten world. Many of them are, as I said, deliberately excluded as we consider funding and the resourcing, the education of musicians and music educators, and the scholarly practice of the academy. I just want to look at, I'm going to run you past a few of these slides, and you're going to think about this idea of question of exclusion and the question of the forgotten world. So am I doing the right thing here by clicking? That should, oh yes. So, who do we exclude? Where do we not perform? What kinds of concept protocols do we observe and not? Whose music is not represented? As you can see, I'm turning every question as far as possible. Who is not making music? Who has no access to making music? If you look at this list, I mean, it's only a kind of a partial list, but and I like always to put ourselves in there because I think of ourselves only temporarily able, because sometime in our lives we'll probably be one of those if we haven't already been one of those on that list. I live at the moment in the richest country in the world, which has almost 16 million children living in poverty, and they are routinely forgotten by my profession. So I wanted to just, in the context of this idea of the imprisoned, is give you the sense of what I think is the forgotten world. But the main part of the forgotten world that I want to consider in today's presentation is the imprisoned. The truth of American incarceration is so ugly and enormous that it is no wonder that its continuation is only possible because most Americans are simply unaware of the scale of this vast problem. Some of you may already be aware that, but allow me to present a few facts. With 5% of the world's population, America has more than 25% of the world's prisoners, with the total number being close to 2.5 million. The Bureau of Justice reports that the number of adults under correctional supervision in the United States in 2010 was over 7.2 million if one includes parole, probation, and multiple forms of detention. Incarceration has reached a massive scale, with Americans becoming increasingly punitive while showing no evidence that the country is any safer or healthier as a result. There are the obvious disparities in class and race at stake. To cite a few data, the NAACP, the African American organization, says that if you look at these figures, they show them to you. 1 in 6 black men had been incarcerated as of 2001. If current trends continue, 1 in 3 black males born today can expect to spend time in prison during his lifetime. 1 in 100 African American women are in prison. Nationwide, African Americans represent 26% of juvenile arrests, 44% of youth who are detained, 46% of the youth who are judicially waived to criminal court, and 58% of the youth admitted to state prisons. About 14 million whites and 2.6 million African Americans report using an illicit drug, but 5 times as many whites and although 5 times as many whites are using drugs as African Americans, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of whites. As I mentioned today already, it is not only a matter of race, as you can see here, but also a matter of socioeconomic disparity. If you are poor, you cannot afford the same level of treatment as someone of means would. Riemann and Leighton capture this in the title of their book, The Rich Get Richer and the poor get prison. Here I would like to touch on three other components. It's an interesting fact. Look at this. African Americans serve virtually as much time in prison for a drug offense as whites do for a violent offense. I'd like to look at three aspects of the incarceration catastrophe that are perhaps little known. One is juvenile detention, solitary confinement, and life without parole. On any night, approximately 10,000 children are held in adult prisons and jails in America, placing them at terrible risk of sexual abuse together with the furthering of their criminal capital. All over the nation, more than 80,000 people at any time are subjected to solitary confinement for short or extended periods, frequently lasting as long as several years. Some of these are children and those with mental illness. And the third one is the American Civil Liberties Union estimated that in 2012 there were over 3,000 prisoners sentenced to life without parole. I hope you understand what I mean here. When you say, of course, many people, we have life sentences, and then we have life without parole, which means that there is never a hope that you will get out. You are sentenced to die in prison for non-violent offenses. Some offenses for which mandatory life without parole sentences have been meted out include sorry, I was ahead of my slides. Include these: life without parole, having a trace amount of cocaine in clothes pockets that were so minute, acting as a go-between in the sale of $10 of marijuana, having a stash of over-the-counter decongestant pills, attempting to cash a stolen check, stealing tools from a tool shed, shoplifting 3 belts. Life without parole. And the list can go on, but my point here is simply illustrative to set a framework for the human rights abuses committed by the United States against its poor and mainly black citizens. Now, of course, these are a result of mandatory sentencing. The United States is one of very few countries in the world that has life without parole, and certainly for nonviolent offenses. So now let me go to the context in which I've been teaching, and let me go to my next file. So my colleagues and I have been teaching for the last 4 years in my colleagues. I have 3 colleagues. I want to mention their names because I think it's important. Jamie Hillman, Emily Howe, Trey Pratt. These 3 colleagues now have been working in 2 prisons in the state of Massachusetts for the last 4 years. Medium security men's prison with approximately 1,500 men, of whom a third are serving life sentences, and a women's prison, the only one in the state, with women serving prison sentences of varying lengths and a variety of violent and non-violent convictions. So this is a slide of the Norfolk, the men's prison in which we work. Can't show you pictures of the inside of the prison. And this is the outside, a part of the inside of the women's prison. And this is the women's prison from the outside. Almost all of the people we work with, and just last week I asked the men to just 3 to 4 days ago, I asked the men if they would raise their hands to indicate which of them had been subjected to solitary confinement, and every single one of them has been subjected to solitary confinement. It is the case with all the women as well, frequently for minor or unsubstantiated reasons. At least 2 of the men, but more of the men with whom we've worked, have been held since their teenage years, sentenced as children, sentenced as minors, to die in prison, serving for life without parole. So America is one of the 2 countries in the world that has not ratified the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, which means that America has, for many years, sentenced children to die in prison. And in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court that ruled that it was unconstitutional to sentence a minor to die in prison. But notwithstanding that, there are still hundreds, indeed thousands of children, well, former children, now adults, who were sentenced as children to die in prison. In both prisons that we are working with a group of men and women who are part of the university in which I work has a prison education program. There are no auditions, no musical auditions, no artistic auditions to be part of this. We take as many as will comfortably fit in the room. So in the women's prison, we have a room that is, a relatively small room, and we can take somewhere between 10 and 15 women. And in the men's prison, we have a slightly larger room, and we currently have 26 men, which is a rather large group for the size of the room. But anyway, we're happy to have these 26 men. So I wanted to just give you this because I realized that as you talk about the violence, it's the context of violence, and this is what one of the men wrote a while ago. He says, "If we can bleed, then we can be killed. And if we show emotion, then they know we can be broken. We, the incarcerated, have one common goal: survival. To do this, we build walls in hope." Part of the work that I will be doing today is actually representing the voices of the men and the women with whom I've worked. And it always feels a little bit uncomfortable for me as a teacher, as an activist, as an artist, as a scholar, to stand here in this very beautiful and comfortable room as a free person and able to stand here and to speak to you without having their bodies, themselves here. And I'm mindful of that, and it always makes it a little bit uncomfortable but of course, on the other hand, I know that I come with their good wishes, at least so they say. And I also feel that representing their work, which is what I'm going to be doing today, concentrating is on representing their work rather than representing my inquiry into their work, but representing their work itself. So I'll try and go through that as quickly as I can. Here's one of the men who talked about this idea of being prey or being strong, and how strength and vulnerability are at play in the work that we do. So before we started working, I did a lot of field work into prisons and to particularly music programs in prisons. And what I discovered, I did interviews and so on. I was in Thailand, in prisons in Bangkok, and did field work with prison music programs in Germany and South Africa and in Indonesia, Sweden, and so on. And also, I've done quite a lot of work in the West Bank, which I feel is a huge prison in many ways. And I came to particularly when I talk about music programs, I discovered that what people are doing largely, and I'm not going to give you a broad brushstroke on that, but what I discovered largely is that people are replicating music education classrooms in the prison, representing existing power dynamics in the prison, representing sort of the autocracy of music ensembles in the prison. So they were going there, and then the success stories were about teaching songs, and isn't it good that prisoners can sing after all? Here they are, and you have films and so on about how good music is because here they are, prisoners are singing. And I think in a sense there is a salvationist, redemptionist kind of view of yes, you can go in there and redeem people through music. And we sought to find an alternative route to the work that was happening. So we we discovered, working organically, an approach that we called empowering song. And I want to tell you a little bit about empowering song. We wanted to work differently, and this led us to this approach we call empowering song, which is rooted in improvised song, songwriting, poetry, body work, movement, imagery. The philosophy of teaching is rooted in and located in a number of participatory paradigms rather than performance paradigms, but most particularly in Augusto Boal's theater of the oppressed. The hallmark of this approach lies in the idea of consensus, the idea of open-ended mindset is rather than predetermined outcomes, but letting the outcomes be determined by the people who are participating. We aimed to displace and disrupt, as well as subvert, the authority structures of the prison within the context of the prison classroom. And that's a rather difficult thing to do, but that's what we're doing. And the approach, essentially the empowering song approach, has what we believe is the following characteristics. One is we talk about the body with the song. Connecting the body with the song is another means by which we can understand the full measure of a song, which goes beyond this idea of just keeping the beat, but it's more aligned to music so that participants can communicate and express themselves in ways that are not possible with just speech or singing alone, and resonate with a long view, a long historical genetic view of the body and music. The next is song and self, and that is to say, for each song, we find a way to connect directly to one's own experience or empathically to someone else's. So in a sense, every song is located within this idea of story and how one might see one's own story within the context of that. We are also, in a sense, we try to lead them to the understanding because they are in the same way that we are, they are customized to be consumers and clients of music. And so we try to move them away from that mindset, and so that in the sense that they're understanding and valuing who they are as human beings, as the music in them. And we say each of us has a distinct song print, a voice print. And as to quote Boal in his Aesthetics of the Oppressed, he says, "All I ask is, let us sing with our own voice, even if it is hoarse. Let us dance with our own body, even if it is doddery. Let us speak our own speech, even if we are uncertain." The next characteristic is the kind of song and the world around us. You may not be, you may not be familiar with this endless round of police violence against African Americans, or you may be, I don't know how much that travels outside the United States. In fact, one of the men showed me just last week a song he has written called "Black Man Down," which the prison authorities did not allow him to sing because it was considered too controversial. And so here's a sense in which the song allows them to connect to the world around them, and I'll give you some more examples about how that has worked for them as African Americans, but also in a larger sense of people who are part of a criminal justice system where they happen to be usually poor or minority. We have a mix of ethnicities and origins. Although we have a disproportionate number of African Americans, we also have whites, we have Latinos, we have people of other origins. There are also usually quite a high number of Muslims and very often African Americans who've converted to Islam in the prison. We also talk about the song as springboard and channel. So in other words, the song as a springboard is the metaphorical elements of song can springboard into poetry, into journaling, into visual and dramatic work, and that song as a channel enables the interconnectedness of music to several other forms. Song can be a means by which injustice can be heard, understood, and the pursuit of justice undertaken, whether this just pursuit be a micro interpersonal one or in a larger sphere. And that's a difficult one, of course, because as you know, we're still working within a prison context. You know, we're not there to, we're not able to work in a much larger sense. We work within a very specific confine. I want you to understand where that is, where the limits of that are. The next point is this idea of connective communal tissue. That through the activity in the prison classroom, we regain, or gain in some cases, ancient forms of communal music making. And music thus becomes a social defragmenter. Song circles, for example, are archetypal forms of music making, as are other forms of community music. They allow us to experience a sense of sharing, listening, and group empathy. Music thus extends far beyond its typical uses of entertainment and ceremonies and enters the realm of social bonding, celebration, and defiance. And in that sense, I want to say that we also have rival gangs in the particularly with the men, of course, with the men. We have rival gangs in the same room, so the idea of building a community within the classroom is particularly important. In the women's prison, there's a totally different dynamic, because in the women's prison, almost all the women are in same-sex relationships with other women, and that's another dynamic that's at play. So the idea of building a community in the classroom, in the room, is difficult in both with men and with women, but for different reasons. And the last characteristic of this is this idea of song as dialogue. Professional music and most of the music we do is situated within a culture of monologue, kind of what Jeff was talking about, this idea of culture of control. In other words, musicians play, audiences listen, and I think we acknowledge that these are valid cultural behaviors, but dialogic music activities, where singing with others, singing as conversation, song building as partnership, these kinds of modalities are little explored, little understood, and in that sense, for the men and the women we work with, it's kind of new experience. So I'm not able to share with you the voices of the men and the women I work with. I'm not allowed to take anything into the prison other than paper. I couldn't even take a pen like this because it has a spring in it, and we're not allowed to take anything with a spring. So you know, I feel I can't represent their voices, and in a sense, I think in some sense I think that's a good thing, because if you heard them singing, you might be disappointed, you know, in a sense, because you'll be listening for sound, and our orientation is so much about what does it sound like, and then I think they'd be underserved by that. So there's a sense in which, you know, this, you know, there's a velvet cloth, and underneath the velvet cloth is a whole series of processes that lead us to where and how the music is formed, undertaken, and so on. So I can't share with you that, but what I can share with you is an enormous collection of their work. And so here is where am I going? Am I going the wrong direction? I am. Why isn't it moving? Oh, the computer seems to have frozen for reasons I don't understand, but you know, here's an interesting thing, of course. You know, we have nothing in the prison other than, you know, it's like another environment. We're there by ourselves completely. There's no technology, there are no computers, there are no iPads, iPhones. You have an experience there that I've been in slums in India. I've been in some of the most dispossessed parts of the world, and nowhere in the world is there such a level of being in another time sense. And some of the men have been there for so long, they don't know what a computer is, they don't know what the internet is, they have no concept of what a phone is that you walk around with, you know. So one of the examples I like to give is this idea of song as channel, as springboard. You know, we're doing this African American spiritual with the women, and I think you might know it is Sing with me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Way beyond the blue. The last line is way beyond the blue. Please sing with me. That's so easy. 3 lines the same and the last line different. And do Lord, oh do remember me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Way beyond the blue. And so I asked the women, what might way beyond the blue mean? Well, what might the blue mean? And some said the blue was sky, someone said heaven, someone said the river to go over, some meant freedom, some said liberation, some said death, and all those kinds of things. And so I said, well, this idea of creating song, creating poetry, and I asked asked them all to write. We do a lot of this kind. So speak to me, what's going on here? Why is this frozen? So to answer your question more specifically, I didn't have to. I think that the prison is of the understanding that we are doing a music appreciation class, whatever that might mean to them. I think that's so it's idea of the kind of work that we're doing, which is okay. So let's try again. Are we in? Okay. Is it moving? Yeah. It is moving, right? Okay, so this is the bit that it stops. I don't know what's going on. Can you just play with it a bit? So let me take your question. So I think that I didn't have to. No, I have to. Oh, there's. So this young woman wrote this particular poem, which as a response to this way beyond the blue. I'm back on here. So heavens above. I'll come back to the poem because it's really important. There was another question. Was another question? Did you have a question?
Yes. Do you have more of a question you can take, or is it about the same? Is it something that people are attracted to?
Well, there's an enormous waiting list to come. But one of the problems is that we don't want to turn the group over every week. We want to work with the same people for a space of 3 months, and then so there are no so we have to work in this kind of way to allow for
like a rotation.
Yes, so 3 months, and then we are willing to change the group. The problem is, of course, with this is that we have to evict some. We say to them, you've been with us for 2 years now. I think we need to allow for other people to come in. It's just difficult to do because some people want to be with us forever, but and in that case, new men can't work with us, and that's also a difficulty. It's difficult for us to try to do this because, in a sense, part of our sense is actually to want to reach a large number of people, but on the other hand, we really can't do that effectively. I should mention, I did talk about this. We have these children who've been sentenced to die in prison. One of the men, who's 52 years old now, has just been because of the court ruling, was resentenced, and at the age of 52, after being in prison for 35 or so years, has now been put into pre-release, and we expect that he'll be released at the end of this year, which is a huge thing, you know. And when he was asked by the parole board about what was one of the most important things for him about turning his life around, he mentioned the music program. The recidivism, the reoffending rate of people who've been through our program is next to zero. I don't have exact figures, but if you compare that with the national figures of reoffending, that's a huge disparity. How are we doing there? I really am completely, sorry?
I tried to go past that slide and then started from there, but it just crashes.
Try an old version of this.
Scroll straight down to the slide that you want to go to.
What's happened now?
Oh. Do you have your charger with you?
I do. I have. I've been giving PowerPoint presentations for my whole life. Almost, it feels like that, and I've never had this problem before. So, sorry. Please, yes. Oh, what have we got here?
Keeps crashing.
I imagine that in those prisons there are many Colombians and Latin American people. Yes, I'm pretty sure. And have you worked with songs of their traditional music? Have you working with songs that are meaningful for them? Or what?
It's a very interesting question about songs that are work for them, because as I said, we have such a mixture of people in the room. We have African Americans, whites, we have Latinos, we have Chinese, we have Russian, so we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have you have atheists and so on. So I think it's very difficult for us to know what's appropriate for them. And one of the things that I've been doing is we've been mixing repertoire that might be familiar to them, or might resonate with their cultural situation, and repertoire that's completely unfamiliar. A few years ago, I discovered that for reasons I can't explain, Gregorian chant is of immense fascination to the men and women. So once I started to introduce that, we did that just a simple, maybe Veni Creator Spiritus. Mentes tuorum visita, implesso pena gratia, quaes tu creasti pectora. Amen. And we talked to the men about how we can see this in more than a simply narrow liturgical context. And so last year I asked the men if they would. So I said, I'm going to sing this to you, and I sang this to them. And then I asked if they would do. Anyone heard of Tai Chi? And they do you want to save it onto a stick and play it through another machine? Exactly. Right. So and one of them said, yes, Tai Chi means moving your hands slowly or your body slowly. And I said, yes, so why don't we do that? And so here they are, singing Gregorian chant and doing this Veni creator spiritum mentes tuorum. They were doing all this, and I thought, here is this amazing stuff happening there, and with amongst the men, and they don't even know how. And you know, I mean, you it's not happening anywhere, right? I mean, it's not happening. So this guy, and I said, now look at see what's happening around the room, and they're kind of this idea of being completely surprised at who they are, what is happening around them within the context of this particular room. I'm going to read, because I have the text of that poem that young woman wrote on Way Beyond the Blue, and this is what she said. I'm going to read it to you, and she says, "Minutes now feel like eternity. Always you are out of reach, beyond my grasp, swallowed whole, so far beyond the blue. How quickly sorrow comes to song and drags the meaning forth from everything. And I die to say I missed you. I'd lay it bare to say I cared, but my heart still wears its wanting way beyond the blue." And we didn't ask her what it means, because I think it's not, you know, one of the things, of course, in our work is that we don't interrogate. In other words, we don't know, unless they tell us, we don't know what they're in there for. We don't know whether somebody's a rapist or a drug dealer or a murderer or an innocent person, right? It's not and so we don't also know what their loss or suffering might be. Sometimes they share with us that they have children, grandchildren, and so on. But so we have found, I'm going to read because while this is recovering, we have found that adopting a theme for our work encourages all of us to anchor our songwriting, poetry, etc. And so we talk about repertoire. You know, we've been taking lines out of songs as metaphors for the kind of work that we do. So a couple of early last year we took "And Neither Have I Wings to Fly" from the Anglo-Celtic song "O Waly Waly." You know that, right? Yes? Let's sing it. My British friends can join me. "The water is wide, I cannot get o'er, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I." I'm not a singer, by the way, so that's but the words "and neither have I wings to fly" gave them a whole sense in which they could see their lives, or see what wings might mean, what might flight mean, what might an inward flight mean for them, what might flight be for others, what did freedom and liberty mean within the context of who they were. And they used this to express hope, pessimism, desperation. One elderly African-American man wrote this: "Men disregard the potential of my African mind. Trialed, sentenced, and convicted as my hawk's wings are clipped, as human justice is derailed, my new slavery condition is jail. And neither have I wings to fly, to justify my being, what I believe in, the crimes against me. My black face, some can call treason, an injustice that has touched us deeply in the history of time. Justice has never been designed to be mine." Frequently, the communal experience can be so confronting as to bring up old memories, what Cheshire describes as twice-lived experience. Let me read an extract from a man who relived the past in the context of the music making in the class. He says this: "This experience amounted to a panic attack in class and has opened another inner child wound that has laid dormant under the surface for many years, all in need of healing. I am much more aware now of why I chose music as a security blanket, a way to be included without having to expose the exclusion I feel within, minimizing my vulnerability. I love music. It has become my bridge to the world. A child given up at birth, sexually abused from the age of 6 to 8, dealing with many abandonment and trust issues, fighting to survive and keep the music within alive. On one occasion, we had a young man, I call D for the moment, who had participated quietly for weeks without drawing attention to himself. And we have these group improvisation work, some of the teamwork, and the men and women are not used to working in teams, in small groups, and so on. So, and the teams are chosen randomly. How can one stare deeply into my eyes and don't see innocence, my adolescence taken from me in handcuffs because of one misstep in my misguided life? Misread, misjudged, and misunderstood by the blinded, but never nearly once in my adolescence had anyone listened to me or explained my misbehavior to an adult in order to comprehend an adolescent's mind as to why a child could commit a crime. Because of one mistake, I am misled and misrepresented by dominions, playing the double standards of the law, which my family, my future, and my faith are fading away slowly like dark clouds covering the sunny sky, and my smiles turn into frowns, frightening and fighting off a dark shadow that isn't mine. Listen to my own tears pouring and pounding off the concrete floor, ripping my heart out for attention in order for anyone to hear my cries. Beyond these barbed wires, white walls, screaming for someone to help save my adolescence behind these cell doors. I'm just a child misplaced in a machine without mercy, and I'm missing my mother's warmth, who nurtured me to become somebody for the future of today's society, yet my adolescence gone. So he rapped this poem out, and when he finished, we were stunned and silenced, and the men were very affirming to him. And then he said words that still resonate with me. He said, "This is the first time anybody in my life has ever listened to me." And I thought, really, within the context of the music making, he was able to say, now, I'm not sure that it was entirely true. I'm just telling you what he said. He said, the first time anybody has ever listened to me. So I wanted to show to you, and if we get the PowerPoint, I want to show you some examples of their artwork, their visual art that comes out of the song. Remember, I was talking about empowering song being a springboard into other things, into visual arts. And so the men and the women don't have access to paint. But what they have is, they do have candies or sweets called M&Ms. Do you know what M&Ms are? You do? You've been colonized by America as well. Right. I feel sorry for you. So anyway, they dissolve the M&Ms into water, and the outside of the M&Ms become paint. You know, so they dissolve that, and then they aren't allowed paintbrushes, but they cut their hair, well, if they have any, and make paintbrushes, and so they've been creating this. My power cord, yes, of course. So they do that, and so we have this astonishing collection of which I'm happy to share with you. If the PowerPoint doesn't get up, I'll be happy to share with you separately, because it's an astonishing, amazing visual artwork which I can't show you until it comes up. Let's talk about impact now for a moment. Generally, when I tell people that I work musically in prisons, they immediately say how wonderful they think I am, or how wonderful they think it is. And then when I tell them about the type of work that we do, they frequently characterize it as music therapy. It's kind of interesting, you know. I always love the conversations telling people I work in prison, see what happens. Very often, I have these wonderful musicians who say, "Well, I'd like to come and play for them." And I say, "Well, why do you want to play for them?" I say, "Well, I mean, I've got this. I've been preparing this Beethoven Sonata program. I'm happy to play for them. I said, well, what about them? Actually, they're also deprived of a chance to listen to beautiful music. So part of me feels conflicted by that. But this idea of musicians going in and delivering and going out. What we try to do is actually create less distance between this idea of being a musician and being a non-musician. But it's also when I tell people about the work I do, this idea of seeing it as something else other than the kind of work that we would do if we were doing it in a classroom. In other words, if I was helping you to garden, I'd be helping you to garden. The moment you're in a wheelchair, I'd call it horticulture therapy, right? If I was helping you to garden and you are a normal person, that would be just a normal thing to do. But the moment I put you in a wheelchair, society would start to call it horticulture therapy. We have to be careful that the location of a population does not determine whether something is or isn't. And so when we work in social impact or social change, particularly with dispossessed populations, we must move beyond these kinds of narrow sense of labels. We must move beyond the self-congratulatory, the admiration, and the multiple, and look for multiple narratives of interrogation. Just as kind of the work that Jeff was talking about earlier today. Look systematically, nuance the discussion, and understand where this stands within the context of numerous power dynamics and power differentials. We must get used to interrogating what we do, particularly with marginalized populations. And there's too much of congratulatory work that's happening in prisons, and I'm really hoping that it can be studied more and more. The research is very difficult. Yeah. I mean, but I know a lot about what's happening in Europe, and that's quite different to what's happening, what's even allowed in the United States. I've also been working with a prison musical group in Indonesia, and it's a completely different thing again. So the United States is very, very difficult for us to work in research, and our work particularly is particularly difficult. And I can't obviously study myself. We're down. You need my password? Oh. Well, that's an easy thing to do. Oh, we restarted my computer. Okay, well, that's great. Yeah, well, so through the, I'm not sure what happened, but through the examples of what I wanted to show you, and sorry, I got ourselves. There were numerous examples. I have one that I have on my iPad that I'd like to read out to you, and once again I'm sorry that I got subverted by technology. I actually asked the men recently if they would talk about impact, and asked what impact might mean for them in the terms of I told them I was coming here, and so I asked them anonymously to give me a sense of the impact, and I don't know if I can find it quickly enough, but well, I'll show that to you in a second. I have one. I know I've come to the end, so I apologize very much for. Here's one letter I wanted to read to you. This is going to be in the public domain because it was not written to me; it was written to somebody else about the work that we're doing. And this young man has written this. to whom this may concern. Music has changed my life in ways so drastic, I do not believe any choice of words would be able to do the change any justice. So I will do my very best to try to get you to understand where I'm coming from. I came to prison at the age of 16 years old. I was only a child. I received a 20 to 22-year sentence and became very bitter and hateful. For many of the years I spent in prison, I did not value life because I felt that no one else valued my life. How would they? They just took away my life and made it clear that I was worth nothing to them. This view would not completely change for me until my first music class. I was free to be myself and empowered by music to make a difference. No matter what type of mood I was in, music could relate. People could hear my hunger, feel my pain, and share my joy through the sound of music. I never would have realized how much power words I would write down and recite would ever have over others. This impact created a shift in me and created a newfound openness to a new kind of environment. The environment became the classroom, and every time I stepped foot into that classroom, I was free. I met new students, professors, artists, singers, dancers, and so many good people that I started to learn of self-worth and began to value life again. Each class became a new challenge on self-improvement and ways to better the world by using music. Music heals the wounded soul, reaches out and touches the hearts of those who are in need, frees the mind of the imprisoned, and bridges the gap between any race, gender, age group anyone can think of. I'm now 32 years old and still in prison, but I'm free because music takes me wherever I want to be. And he wrote this. As you can see, it's rather a big blank check that he's written for music, but I wanted to just give you this within the context of the impact discussion that we were having. And there's a lot more that I missed by, because I don't always have the text for everything here. But I also have examples that I can show you later on of the, they're in a book, the artwork that they have been doing, it's just quite remarkable. But I can share that with you. And I'm very sorry that for some reason or other, it feels like I'm in a prison with no PowerPoint. But are there any last questions?
I have one more. And
yes?
No, I have the microphone. I have another question. Because some time ago I worked with gun shelters, sicarios in Colombia, those who were part of the army of Pablo Escobar. And one of the problems that I had was to work with their body. It was so difficult for them. And especially also the tuning, to change, to expand the voice. It was so difficult for me to work with different kind of musical altitudes or different sounds. Did you have the same problem, or do you have the same problem?
No, I don't say it's a problem. Sometimes people have been denied the experience of music for 50 years. Some of them have had almost no experience in their background, in their childhood, and some part of the work we say we were actually trying to create conditions. What we're trying to do is create conditions in which people can experience childhood. Mm-hmm. So part of that sometimes means finding oneself, voice-wise and musically speaking. I don't want to call it a problem. I think it's part of the work, yes, of course.
My name is Miya Nakamura. I came from Japan, teaching at Kyushu University. Your presentation was very interesting, and I really admire what you are doing. My question is, I understand what you are doing for making a song text. But I have still not quite good idea about how you let them making a melody or some kind of musical part. How would you let them doing some sounding part or making a voice part?
So if I give you the example of that particular song, that say Way Beyond the Blue, I mean, what happened there was that we introduced the song, they wrote the poem, and then I asked the women to sing back their songs. I mean, since we do lots and lots of activities to do with melodic creation and melodic improvisation, it's an interesting thing that you ask people sing what you want. And first of all, it might freak them out a little bit to say, what am I singing? How am I singing? But when we invite them to sing and say, sing what you've written.
So is it like making putting some emotion with saying words kind of thing?
Well, they have created the words. In this particular case, she created the words, or they create the words, and then they improvise a melody that goes with the words, and the melody is part of the. So and they're become used to it from the very beginning of this idea of creating melody, of building melody, and
so somebody starts singing something. Would you do would you how can I say? Would you facilitate something? Would you teach them how to make better or something like that?
Well, since we do lots of group improvisation activities, then when I shouldn't say I've also done this kind of work with in prisons and or in other kinds of settings where people have had no experience of melodic creation. I say, well, how about you sing a line of your poem, and usually that can happen. And it's sort of interesting how if you invite people to do something they've never done before, and I've done it a few times, it's honoring what they've done. It can happen quite easily.
You must be really good at letting people create.
It's not about me.
Anyway, thank you.
I don't want to hold things up. Are there any other questions? Once again, please forgive me for the technological problems that. Oh, sorry, I think Rachel has a question or something. Oh. And John has no pointed questions for me?
No, now it's on. Sorry. Thank you very much. Very thought-provoking. In particular, the difference between, I think, the American and the UK detention system and the arts in that. I was just wondering whether you find the need to channel in some way the kind of traumatic experiences that you may have in encountering this completely other world.
You mean my traumatic experiences?
So, I mean, whether this is for you, I mean, many people visiting prisons, I know, have to process thereafter the sort of things that they're learning about the suffering of people in detention, the immense violence. There's a lot of emotion that comes over, actually just the sheer presence with people who are suffering very, very intensely, and then perhaps facilitating through music the expression of that suffering in ways that can surprise everybody.
Right.
Stuff comes out. And I wondered if you could just address that for a moment.
Yes, let me address that. I mean, I think it's a very empathic question that you've asked, Rachel, and it really is something that I think I've discovered more and more about myself, and that I've been working in prisons for 4 years, as I said, also, and I think it has made me. I mean, it's not the only thing that I do. It's one small part of the work I do, but it has completely changed my life because it's brought me face to face so many things about America, about human values, about fatherhood, about motherhood, about personhood, about masculinity, about sexual orientation, about so many things. And as the time has gone on, I experience more and more a profound feeling of sadness that I never had before, a profound sense of anger as well, a profound sense of joy at the same time, as I have hope and despair. So, I mean, I think, I mean, I talk about it a little bit to the people I'm closest to, but I would say it's very difficult work, because you go in there and we go in there and we come out, and I feel as if I'm carrying them with me, carrying the people I work with all the time, their voices, their faces, their past. And I mean, there's a young man I work with is probably 31, 32, who has a teenage son, and he said when he was growing up, everyone in his life was in prison. His parents, his grandparents, every single person. And he said, through this work, he wants to make sure his child doesn't go to prison. Those words, those thoughts, they completely stay within my skin and my blood. So very difficult for me to distance myself from the work. So for me to talk about myself as a researcher becomes very, very difficult in the context of this work, because as Rachel so empathically asks this question, you know, I have become so much part of this that you know, I feel as if I'm ready for some sort of really unraveling of my own emotions as part of this kind of difficult work. Thank you very much. Thank you.